Number 19. Cara Michaelson. During the early morning hours one day in May of 2021, a Nashville man awoke to find a drunk young woman in his apartment petting his dog. Later identified as 21-year-old Cara Michaelson, she seemed very intoxicated, according to police, who said that the suspect tried to enter several apartments before finding a front door that was unlocked. Michaelson was allegedly completely unaware of where she was or where she lived. The police reportedly tried to help her get home or find someone to come pick her up, but she was unable to give them any useful information. Left with no other options, officers booked her into custody on a public intoxication charge. She was held for the mandatory 8-hour sobering up period and was released with a future court date. Number 18. Sarah Finn. In a shocking incident that made headlines across Australia, a 24-year-old woman named Sarah Finn was captured on camera shoving a policeman at the Melbourne Cup in 2015. According to authorities, Finn approached Acting Superintendent Stephen Cooper right as he was about to address a crowd of 94,000 spectators. The young woman shoved Cooper, then turned around and giggled as the victim fell backward into a flower bed. Cooper later told investigators that Finn was seen talking to reporters shortly before the infamous shove, and she allegedly asked what she had to do to get on the news. Afterwards, she posted a comment on Channel 7's Facebook page, stating that they forgot to mention they told her to do it. But cameraman James Paul later said that absolutely nobody told Finn to shove a cop. Furthermore, Finn was reportedly sober when she pushed Cooper. She definitely achieved her goal of getting attention and being featured on the news, but at the end of the day, she made a huge fool of herself. To further the confusion, Cooper said that when Finn first approached him, he thought she was a reporter. Finn pleaded guilty to 1 count of assaulting an officer and 1 count of willful damage and was fined $800. She also had to pay to replace Cooper's glasses, which fell off his face and broke during the fall. Number 17. Lydia Elizabeth Badio. People will do a lot of things to try to get out of an arrest. A 38-year-old Mexican national named Lydia Elizabeth Badio allegedly tried flirting her way out of trouble when she was pulled over in Jim Hogg County, Texas in April of 2023. Bodycam footage of the conversation showed Badio saying that she was heading out for drinks with 2 female passengers who she claimed were her friends. As a trooper ran a trio's driver's licenses through the system, Badio allegedly tried to distract him by flirting with him. She told the trooper that she was looking at his eyes because he was pretty handsome, but it wasn't enough to derail him from the task at hand. Badio, a Mexican national living in the US, eventually admitted to picking up the 2 women at a people-smuggling stash house in Mission and trying to smuggle them into the country. According to police, both of the suspects' passengers were migrants from El Salvador who'd attempted to pass themselves off as Mexican nationals using fake driver's licenses. But they were caught, and Badio was charged with human smuggling. Number 16. Reuben Hughes. An 18-year-old Florida man named Reuben Hughes was so eager to get to a booty call one night in December 2017 that he didn't even realize that the police were trying to pull him over for speeding. According to an arrest report, the pursuing deputy had his lights flashing and his siren on as he tried to enact a traffic stop in Pinellas County. But Hughes just kept on going, blissfully unaware that his plan to go see his girlfriend was about to change. Authorities accused the young man of continuing to speed and drive recklessly, even after he noticed that he was being pursued. The teen allegedly willfully refused to comply with the deputy's obvious attempt to get him to pull over, but eventually he complied after additional units joined the chase. During the ensuing conversation, Hughes reportedly said that he was trying to get to his girlfriend's house in order to have relations. Following the botched booty call, he was booked on a felony charge of fleeing and eluding. Hughes was released on his own recognizance after spending 16 hours in custody, and it's likely safe to assume that he was more mindful in the future of any signs that the police might be trying to pull him over. Number 15. Paul Kean. A Los Angeles man was showering at his gated Bel Air residence one afternoon in June of 2021 when his wife contacted him and told him that she'd seen a naked intruder on the family's home security camera. Matt Sabbs later told NBC Los Angeles that he overheard someone entering the house and had simply assumed it was his wife arriving home. After realizing that there was a nude stranger inside the residence, he yelled downstairs asking who was in the house and threatening to call the police. Then, in a bizarre face-to-face exchange that was partially captured on camera, the intruder claimed that it was his house and began climbing the stairs. Saabs retreated into a locked room and carefully lowered himself to the ground from a second-floor balcony. He then dialed 911 and reported the strange burglar, who was identified as a 34-year-old transient named Paul Kean. Sadly, the suspect was captured on camera smiling while killing the family's pet parakeets, which the victim's children were undoubtedly devastated about. Additional surveillance footage showed Kean lurking around the Saabs family's pool at around 2 p.m. before making his unwelcome entry into the house. It's unclear why he was naked. Matt's wife, Monica, later told NBC Los Angeles that she was terrified that the intruder would do something to harm her husband as she watched the unusual series of events go down from her phone. Luckily, though, private security and police officers eventually came and removed Kean from the home. He was charged with burglary and was released with instructions to return to court at a later date. The victims eventually realized that Kean had gained access to their home by taking their garage door opener out of their unlocked vehicle. They used the learning experience as an opportunity to remind people to lock their doors, even if they live in a community that seems safe and has a low crime rate. The family also expressed their gratitude that nobody other than the pet birds was harmed in the ordeal. Number 14. Ramon Angel Abrego. In September 2000, an Argentinian man named Ramon Angel Abrego was found guilty of fatally shooting his wife, Eva Falcon, who was 7 months pregnant when she died. The victim was at a medical clinic when her husband mercilessly pumped 4 bullets into her body. Abrego was convicted of femicide, which means that Falcon's murder had gender-related motives. He was sentenced to 20 years in prison, but he escaped in 2001 after serving just a handful of months behind bars. According to the Argentinian news outlet Clarín, he escaped by taking advantage of security deficiencies at a time when 3 guards were overseeing 23 inmates. And by the time staff members noticed his absence, he'd gotten a several-hour head start on his flight from justice. The fugitive wife killer escaped to Chile, then secretly re-entered Argentina, where he spent 22 years living in the Chaco Salteño jungle. In October 2023, Abrego exited the jungle and traveled back to his home region of Tierra del Fuego in the southernmost part of the country. He'd purposely waited for the statute of limitations on his crime to run out, with the understanding that the authorities couldn't force him to serve any more time. Upon reaching the area, however, Abrego was detained by law enforcement. His lawyer requested his release, noting that his now 70-year-old client had chosen to serve his time in hiding, while sources connected with the prosecutor noted that the process isn't as cut and dry as the returning convict might have hoped. It's unclear what the future holds for Abrego, so we'll have to wait and see how things play out in the coming months. Number 13. James Seing. 35-year-old James Seing had just moved from Chicago to Merton, Wisconsin with his parents in May of 2022 when he made a terrible first impression on local law enforcement. On what began as a normal day in the small village, neighbors reported hearing shouting and seeing Seing running down the street naked. He then allegedly set his own car on fire, leaving his driveway covered in burn marks that were still visible months later. Waukesha County deputies tracked Seing across a large meadow, a wooded area, and a marsh next to Okochee Lake, where they found him completely unclothed and covered in yellow soap. According to an arrest report obtained by local station WISN, Seing told law enforcement that he was at the location to bathe. He also allegedly claimed to be a licensed psychotherapist and an expert in magic, and said that he was attempting to summon a phoenix. When asked if he'd taken any drugs, Seing reportedly told the deputy that he didn't take anything that should be considered illegal. His parents also spoke with the police, clarifying that their son had recently moved into their home and that he'd started an online psychedelic therapy counseling business. Inside a closet in the home, detectives found what they believed to be a psychedelic mushroom farm. The mushrooms were suspected to contain psilocybin, a hallucinogenic drug compound that's indeed illegal in Wisconsin. Seing was charged with lewd and lascivious behavior, attempted manufacture and/or delivery of psilocybin, attempting to maintain a place for drug trafficking, and possession of drug paraphernalia. Number 12. Greg Lawson. Greg Lawson fled the United States shortly before a Louisiana jury convicted him of attempted murder for shooting a man named Seth Garlington in 1991. According to news reports, the shooting occurred after the two men got into a fistfight outside a gas station. Prosecutors accused Lawson of running Garlington off the road and opening fire on the victim. Lawson's disappearance sparked an FBI manhunt, but the search came up empty-handed. For years, federal authorities suspected that he was hiding out somewhere in Mexico, but it wasn't until they received a valuable tip in September 2023 that they finally tracked him down. With help from Mexican law enforcement, the 32-year-long manhunt came to an end. The feds picked up Lawson, who is now 63 years old, in Huatulco. Footage of the fugitive's long-awaited arrest showed Lawson laughing casually as he was being handed over to FBI agents and handcuffed at an airport in Houston, Texas. He likely wasn't laughing, though, when he was extradited to the US to finally face justice for his crimes. According to Mexican authorities, Lawson was living in a coastal area under the identity of a dead person from Alabama. According to the most recent updates on the case, he's currently being held at a jail in Claiborne Parish, Louisiana. Number 11. Jonathan Newman. In one of the most unusual burglaries to occur in the state of Maryland in 2016, a naked man was captured on camera burglarizing a pizzeria in Towson. Surveillance video showed an intruder later identified as 23-year-old Jonathan Newman entering Slice Pizza at around 6 a.m. on a November morning. According to police, he ripped off his clothes once he got inside, then proceeded to throw random items around the restaurant before robbing the cash register and fleeing. The pizzeria's owner, Yanni Rizas, later told local station WBAL that he noticed the front door was ajar when he reported to the restaurant later that morning. He entered to find that the building had been ransacked and noticed a naked burglar on the surveillance footage shortly thereafter. In the video, the suspect could be seen trying to disguise himself by putting a clothing item on top of his head. The restaurant posted the clip on social media, along with an offer of a free year's worth of pizza to anyone who came forward with information helping to identify the suspect. Just a few days later, police announced the arrest of Newman on suspicion of second-degree burglary and several other crimes. He was released on $50,000 bail, and it's unclear what he's up to these days, but he hasn't made any more news headlines for naked intrusions, indicating that perhaps it was a one-time thing. Number 10. Tyler Faken Solo. An intoxicated Florida man was so desperate to evade police in October 2023 that he made his situation infinitely worse by leading Marion County deputies on a high-speed chase. The pursuit began after a deputy noticed the suspect, later identified as 24-year-old Tyler Faken Solo, leaving a Circle K store at a high rate of speed and driving erratically. Later on, during the chase, the out-of-control motorist was captured on camera smashing the passenger side window of his car with his bare head. He then allegedly flung himself through the window, then fled on foot. In the words of the Marion County Sheriff's Office, Faken Solo head-butted the window and flopped out like a dolphin. He also parked on the wrong side of the road and nearly hit two people before he exited the car and tried to run away. It wasn't long before a police canine caught up with him and took him to the ground, and at that point there was no escaping Faken Solo's inevitable arrest. But he made one last attempt to do so before realizing that he wasn't going to get away from the dog. During his subsequent trip to the hospital, the suspect allegedly admitted that he was high during the pursuit. Authorities charged Faken Solo with driving under the influence of alcohol or drugs, aggravated fleeing with injury or damage, and resisting without violence. Number 9. Shannon Tarpan. In late October 2023, authorities in Graves County, Kentucky, announced that they were searching for a 58-year-old fugitive named Shannon Tarpan. She was wanted for first-degree assault, second-degree false imprisonment, and second-degree attempted arson in connection with an incident that allegedly occurred at her home several days earlier. According to investigators, Tarpan held her boyfriend captive at his own home, cut his neck badly enough with a blade to require stitches, doused his house with gasoline and lighter fluid, and left the stove on with a fabric doll sitting on the burner. The doll burned to ashes, but luckily, the flames didn't spread to the rest of the dwelling. More than a month and a half later, in mid-December, Scotland County Sheriff's deputies captured Tarpan in northeastern Missouri. She was found hiding out in a friend's bathroom at 10:30 a.m. at a Memphis apartment building when law enforcement searched the property. According to an agency spokesperson, investigative techniques led them to suspect that Tarpan was holing up at the address. She was extradited back to Kentucky and will now face the music in court for her alleged crimes. Number 8. John Sullivan. 41-year-old John Sullivan's criminal history dates at least as far back as 2002, when he was convicted of attempted first-degree murder and other charges which landed him in prison in Tennessee. Then in 2021, shortly after his release, he was allegedly involved in another violent incident. According to authorities, a woman accused Sullivan of shoving her into a bathtub, grabbing her by the neck, choking her repeatedly, and pointing a gun at her. The victim reportedly told police that she thought she was going to die, but luckily she escaped and ran outside. Sullivan was briefly detained following the incident, but went on the run by the time he was indicted by a grand jury. He was wanted on multiple charges, including aggravated assault with a deadly weapon, aggravated assault by strangulation, being a felon in possession of a weapon, and having contraband in a penal institution. By early 2023, he'd become one of Nashville's most wanted fugitives. Police finally captured Sullivan in December after seeing someone who looked like him get into the passenger side of a vehicle. They wasted no time following the car and enacting a felony takedown, during which Sullivan and the driver were taken into custody. Sullivan allegedly had a state ID belonging to someone else, but law enforcement managed to confirm his identity through his fingerprints. He was booked into jail on 4 outstanding warrants, including one from the U.S. Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives, and he was additionally charged with criminal impersonation. Officials credited public tips for the success of the Metro Nashville Police Department's ongoing effort to catch fugitives, which has resulted in the capture of 80 wanted individuals and counting. Number 7. Naked Tyraade in Miami. On what began as a normal evening in Midtown Miami in May of 2023, a man disrobed without warning during a boxing class at a UFC gym and began attacking people for no apparent reason. Footage of the deranged Tyraade showed the man laying siege to fellow gym members before going outside and assaulting random people in the street, including a homeless man and a person in a wheelchair. The gym's assistant manager, Ray Lopez, told NBC Miami that the employee teaching the class noticed that the man was a little off before he peeled his clothes off and got violent. According to the coach, the man wasn't hitting the bag as usual and was just acting very bizarre as he made his way downstairs and got naked. As bystanders whipped out their phones and hit the record button, staff members attempted to get the man's behavior under control, but he kept fighting back, and he was acting too dangerous for employees to allow him to remain in the gym. So they carried him outside, at which point he began targeting strangers on the sidewalk. It took several fully grown men to eject the suspect from the gym, which serves as a shocking indicator of how out of control his behavior truly was. In one bystander video, an onlooker could be seen trying to protect a homeless man as the raging barefoot nudist repeatedly pummeled him on the sidewalk. Undeterred, the naked individual shifted his focus and walked straight toward the Good Samaritan, who kept saying, "Get out of here, bro," as he stepped backward to avoid being physically attacked. The suspect began throwing fists and kicking as the helpful civilian fell onto the pavement and began yelling for help and for someone to call the police. At one point, the attacker began walking away, but he turned around and tried coming back for more, at which point bystanders took refuge inside a nearby building. The assailant could be heard yelling, "My name is Freemason," repeatedly as horrified onlookers waited for law enforcement to arrive. Police eventually found the man, but their commands to stop the aggressive behavior went unheeded. Left with no other choice, an officer deployed his taser in an attempt to get the suspect under control. On the first try, the taser had no effect and the suspect ran. But the police caught up with him and finally managed to subdue and handcuff him. The unnamed naked man was taken into custody, but it's unclear what happened after that. Speaking with NBC, Lopez said that he hoped the man got the help he needed to overcome whatever he's going through. Authorities didn't clarify whether they charged the suspect with any crimes, but his gym membership was definitely revoked. Number 6. Jonathan L. Don Huertas. A fugitive and accused drug kingpin named Jonathan Huertas, better known as El Don, was captured just in time to spend a 2023 holidays behind bars. The 31-year-old had been on the run for over a year when U.S. authorities found him hiding out in Jalisco, Mexico in September. According to law enforcement, Huertas and his co-conspirators kidnapped 2 people in early 2022 and held them captive in the basement of a Bronx apartment building in the Morris Heights neighborhood, where they proceeded to torture the victims with a hot iron and melted plastic. The group allegedly planned to abduct a 3rd victim, but was stopped from doing so when the police closed in on them. A police spokesperson later revealed that law enforcement staked themselves outside the building and tracked the suspect's movements through video footage. They reportedly captured a clip of Huertas torturing one of the victims by putting a hot iron onto the captive's buttocks and dripping melted plastic on him. 2 days later, another victim was tortured in a similar fashion. 3 of Huertas' associates were taken into custody amid a subsequent raid, during which police found several guns and 9 pounds of fentanyl, cocaine, and other drugs. Accomplices Ronnie Jimenez and Cesar Jimenez later pleaded guilty to drug, weapon, and kidnapping charges, and each received a 7-year prison sentence. A 3rd accomplice named Jasmine Roman pleaded guilty to a drug possession charge and was sentenced to 5 years of probation. But Huertas managed to get away and continued to elude law enforcement for a year and a half, leading up to his recent capture. Following his arrest on a federal warrant, he was extradited to New York, where he faces a slew of drug, assault, and kidnapping charges. He pleaded not guilty and is currently being held without bail pending the outcome of his case. Number 5. James Robert Allen. In early October 2023, a University of Virginia student was abducted in Charlottesville, roughly a mile off campus. Thankfully, though, police arrived promptly at the scene shortly before 10 p.m. and found that the victim had escaped with non-life-threatening injuries. The young woman told officers that a man she didn't know had forced her into his car and tried to strangle her. As she fought back against her captor, he attempted to drive and crashed into multiple vehicles and several trees. Investigators identified the suspect as 40-year-old James Robert Allen and called on state and federal authorities for assistance in apprehending the accused kidnapper. They eventually tracked Allen down thanks to help from members of the public who reported numerous sightings of the suspect. Shortly after noon the following day, authorities arrested Allen in Louisa, Virginia, over 30 miles from where the victim was taken. He was charged with abduction and strangulation as a result. His neighbors told local station 13 News that Allen doesn't live at his residence in Suffolk with his wife and 2 kids. They described the family as nice and quiet people who've never had any known prior run-ins with the police. To this day, it remains unclear why Allen was in Charlottesville on the night of the kidnapping. Number 4. Aaron Chase. The next case on today's list sounds like something straight out of Florida, but it actually happened near the small city of Jamestown, New York. According to police in nearby Lakewood, a local man named Aaron A. Chase was found standing on a street corner naked in the middle of the afternoon in September 2023, with his face painted like the Batman Joker. He was allegedly holding signs with his name and religious sayings on them in large lettering. Chase was arrested on suspicion of public lewdness and disorderly conduct. He was arraigned in the town of Basti and was released with instructions to return to court at a later date. The incident resembled a previous police encounter involving the suspect, who was arrested in 2013 for allegedly harassing Applebee's customers while dressed as the Joker. Unlike the more recent arrest, he was clothed during the prior incident and was also wearing a wig in addition to makeup. Authorities accused Chase of being drunk and refusing to leave the restaurant, and he was charged with trespassing and harassment. In the weeks leading up to the 2013 arrest, Chase reportedly visited the nearby Good Times saloon at least 3 times while wearing the same getup. According to the bartender, he was acting erratically and making gun-shaped gestures with his hand. While Chase's affinity for dressing like the Joker isn't necessarily harmful in and of itself, he seems to adopt an out-of-control persona whenever he wears the ensemble, and it wouldn't be surprising if he landed himself in hot water with the law again in the future for similar reasons. Number 3. Timothy Alen Hog. During the early morning hours one day in November 2023, deputies in Polk County, Florida, responded to a call about a car burglary in the Preservation Point neighborhood. According to reports, a man and a woman were seen trying to break into multiple vehicles. but the suspects fled in a car after realizing they'd been spotted by a deputy who attempted to enact a traffic stop. They refused to pull over and sped away, but got trapped inside the subdivision. As the suspects attempted to turn around and find another way out of the neighborhood, another deputy saw them and tried to pull them over. They attempted to speed away, but they crashed into a parked vehicle and were unable to escape. Police got a good laugh when they noticed that the driver, identified as 37-year-old Timothy Alen Hog, was ironically sporting a neck tattoo that said, "All gas, no brakes." After living up to his apparent mantra, Hog and his passenger, 31-year-old Rebecca Kozub, were taken to a local hospital with non-life-threatening injuries. During an interview with law enforcement following his release from the hospital, Hog allegedly admitted to the car burglaries, but pointed the finger at Kozub, claiming that the crime spree was her idea in the first place. According to local station WHIO, he reportedly told investigators that he fled because he freaked out. Hog now faces 4 counts of burglary of an unoccupied conveyance with an enhancement for crossing county lines, 3 felony counts of petty theft, and eluding police. But that's not all. He was also hit with charges of conspiracy to commit burglary, possession of methamphetamine, possession of marijuana, possession of drug paraphernalia, and resisting without violence. Kozub is also expected to face charges following her discharge from the hospital, where she was transported to receive medical treatment for a broken leg. Number 2. Clyde Calasan. Late one night in October 2023, the Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department received a call about a naked man running through the streets, possibly in the throes of a mental health crisis. Bystander footage showed a responding officer chasing after and fighting the man, later identified as 29-year-old Clyde Calasan, in the middle of an intersection. During the struggle, Calasan could be seen knocking the officer's hat off and forcing him to the ground. The suspect then entered the officer's pickup truck and sped off with the lights flashing. Bystander Kyle Even, who filmed the ordeal, told local station KLAS that he expected to see the police tackle the suspect, not the other way around, and for Calasan to be handcuffed and taken into custody. But it didn't happen as quickly as he thought it would. After Calasan stole the police vehicle, the pursuit continued for more than 5 miles before he crossed over the median and crashed into an SUV, finally bringing the chase to an end. The suspect and 2 individuals in the vehicle that got struck were taken to the hospital with serious injuries. 43-year-old Rico Abrego, who was riding as a passenger in the SUV that got hit, told 8 News Now that he experienced difficulty breathing and suffered a fractured neck, bruising, and an inability to move the entire right side of his body. After receiving medical treatment, Calasan, now infamously nicknamed the Naked Man, was booked into custody on suspicion of robbery, disobeying a peace officer and endangering people, property, grand larceny of a motor vehicle, and battery on a protected person. Additional charges were later added, including 2 DUI counts, 2 counts of reckless driving resulting in death or substantial bodily harm, 2 counts of duty to stop at the scene of an accident, and grand larceny. The judge overseeing the case set Calasan's bail at $150,000. But even if he manages to come up with enough money to secure his release, he'll be required to wear an ankle monitor and will be banned from consuming alcohol and controlled substances. And now for number 1. But if you want to hear more bizarre and crazy stories, stay tuned after the video for some more content. Number 1. A groundskeeper's morbid mistake. The next story on today's list isn't necessarily about an arrest per se, but it was a shocking police-involved incident which is worth sharing on today's list. It happened roughly 35 miles outside Charlotte in rural China Grove, North Carolina, as Halloween approached in October 2023. According to the local police department, a groundskeeper was mowing the lawn at a remote empty cabin when he encountered what he believed was a police training dummy lying face down on the ground. He mowed around it, completely unaware that it wasn't a dummy, but the partially naked dead body of 34-year-old Robert Paul Owens, who'd gone missing days earlier. The body went unreported for another day before a different worker noticed it, realized that it was a dead person and not a dummy, and dialed 911. As crazy as it sounds, the employee who mistook the body for a mannequin had a plausible reason for doing so. Apparently, the property had been used for police training purposes on multiple occasions in the years leading up to the gory discovery. But Owen's family was understandably less understanding about the mix-up. Speaking with local station WJZY-TV, the deceased man's sister, Haley Shue, said that she didn't understand how her brother's body could be mistaken for a Halloween decoration, especially outside of a house that nobody lives in. According to police, Owens didn't bear any visible injuries to indicate that he was shot or stabbed. His body also didn't contain any outward signs of trauma or assault. Authorities said that they didn't suspect foul play, but were treating the death as suspicious given the mysterious circumstances under which Owen's body was found. At the time, toxicology results were pending, but there's been no follow-up in the news about the unfortunate man's cause of death.
9. Johnny and Michelle Damon. In early 2021, police pulled over a suspected drunk driver in Windermere, Florida. Behind the wheel, they found former New York Yankees outfielder Johnny Damon, who, according to a police report, was unsteady on his feet and his speech was extremely slurred. Body cam footage showed the 47-year-old and his wife Michelle Mangan Damon telling officers that they lived just 200 yards away and expressing their support for the Blue Lives Matter pro-police movement. At some point, Michelle became uncooperative. She refused to get into a squad car and told an officer not to effing touch her when he tried physically guiding her toward the vehicle. In the meantime, Johnny commented that his wife fights all the time and that she's crazy. But his behavior was no less embarrassing than Michelle's, as he devolved into allegations that the cops targeted the couple for being Trump supporters. An officer clarified that his reasons for pulling the Damons over had nothing to do with their political beliefs and everything to do with how Johnny was driving, but he continued to insist otherwise. He performed poorly in field sobriety tests and his blood alcohol level tested at 0.3, nearly 4 times the legal limit for driving in Florida. Michelle was charged with battery on an officer and resisting with violence, and Johnny was charged with DUI. He struck a deal with prosecutors and entered a pre-trial diversion program that would eventually see the case dropped if he stayed out of trouble for a certain amount of time, performed community service, and donated to charity. 8. Brook Cruz and William Hone. In 2016, 22-year-old Savannah Graywind was just weeks away from giving birth when she vanished from her family's apartment building in Fargo, North Dakota. She went to visit a neighboring apartment for a few minutes, but never returned home to eat the freshly delivered pizza she'd ordered. The neighbor, Brook Cruz, told detectives that Savannah had left her apartment and that she didn't know anything about her disappearance. But they remained suspicious, and during one of several return visits to her apartment, they discovered a newborn baby. Cruz claimed that Savannah had returned to her apartment hours after she initially went missing, dropped the infant off without explanation, and vanished again. A few days later, Savannah's body was found in a river, bearing clear evidence that someone had cut her open and removed her baby, and that she'd suffered a particularly violent death. Cruz's live-in boyfriend, William Hone, told investigators he'd come home from work to find the bathroom covered in blood and Graywind near death. DNA tests proved that the infant was Savannah's, and Cruz and Hone were charged in connection with her murder. In court, Cruz admitted to concocting a fake pregnancy with plans to somehow get her hands on someone's baby and pass it off as her own. She said Hone had been pressuring her for kids, and she thought it was the only way to keep him in the relationship. Hone said he knew nothing about his girlfriend's plot to murder Savannah, but he admitted to lying to investigators about his knowledge of the crime. Cruz was sentenced to life in prison without parole, and Hone is serving a 20-year sentence. 7. Joseph and Irin Meyers. Small business owner Joseph Meyers met his wife Irin online, married her abroad, and moved her from the Philippines to his rural community in Wayland, New York. At some point, he found himself wanting to expand his business pursuits. Meyers wanted to buy a tow truck company, but he couldn't afford it. Irin wanted to relocate some of her family members to the US, which is also very expensive. The couple began brainstorming ways to come up with enough money to fund their pursuits and narrowed their sights on 60-year-old David Odell. He was a childhood friend of Joe's who suffered intellectual setbacks from a head injury sustained in an accident years earlier. Odell worked part-time for Meyers, and Irin acted as his caretaker. Due to his vulnerabilities, Irin and Joe saw Odell as an easy target. In 2015, Irin convinced Odell to deed his home to her. She took out a $60,000 insurance policy on the property, a $40,000 life insurance policy on Odell with herself as the sole beneficiary, and a $45,000 renter's insurance policy on some of her belongings that were being kept at the property. By then, Irin had already tried to kill Odell by taking away his medication, which she and Joe believed would cause him to have a fatal seizure. The plan failed, so the couple resorted to Plan B in early 2016. Surveillance footage shows Irin removing her belongings from Odell's property shortly before Joseph walked over there with a torch. Minutes later, the house erupted into flames with Odell trapped inside. He burned to death. It wasn't long before investigators discovered evidence that the Meyers were responsible for the crime and arrested them on suspicion of killing Odell. Both Joe and Irin were convicted of second-degree murder and sentenced to 23 years to life. 6. Austin and Kathleen Bhutan. In 2017, 63-year-old Mitchell Ingle was robbed and murdered inside his trailer home in Golden, Colorado. The killer had fled the scene in the victim's pickup truck. A few days later, 23-year-old Chen Wei Guo was shot dead during an attempted carjacking in Utah. Detectives connected homeless couple Austin and Kathleen Bhutan to both murders. They learned that the pair were living under a bridge when Ingle invited them to his trailer to drink and smoke pot. At some point during the night, Ingle allegedly made some inappropriate comments to Kathleen. Feeling disrespected, Austin shot Ingle with a crossbow and cut his throat. Once the couple arrived in Utah, they began looking for another victim to rob and kill. Kathleen reportedly became impatient and started calling Austin a coward. After a brief argument, Austin killed Chen Wei Guo. The Bhutans were tried for the murders in both Utah and Colorado. Austin was sentenced to life without parole, while Kathleen received a 1-year sentence in Utah for receiving stolen property and a 16-year sentence in Colorado in connection with Ingle's murder. 5. Robert and Tiffany Williams. When Montoursville, Pennsylvania couple Robert and Tiffany Williams woke up one day in 2019 to find $120,000 in their bank account, they knew it was probably deposited by mistake. But instead of calling the bank to get to the bottom of the matter, they allegedly went on a spending spree, buying a camper and 2 vehicles. The pair also used some of the money to help out friends in need, which would have been an admirable act of kindness if the couple had used their own money for it. In the meantime, the bank realized that the money had gone to the Williams' account rather than the small business it was intended for due to a teller error. The institution sent the money to the proper recipient and told Tiffany Williams that she and Robert were responsible for returning the full amount of the mistaken deposit. By then, they'd spent more than $100,000. According to local station WNEP, Tiffany told the bank she would speak with her husband and work out a repayment plan. But she stopped communicating at some point, and authorities charged the couple with felony theft and receiving stolen property. Robert and Tiffany both admitted to knowing that the money didn't belong to them and spending it anyway. They were each sentenced to 7 years of probation and ordered to perform 100 hours of community service. 4. Mark and Patricia McCloskey. In the months following the death of George Floyd at the hands of a Minneapolis police officer in 2020, protests demanding justice and racial equality broke out across the U.S. In St. Louis, Missouri, activists attempted to walk to the home of Mayor Lydia Crewson, where they planned to express their disapproval of Crewson's response to a movement to defund the police. Just moments after they entered the affluent gated community, lawyers Mark and Patricia McCloskey burst out of their residence with an AR-15 and a handgun and pointed them at the demonstrators. A video of the confrontation shows Mark McCloskey yelling that the crowd was on private property and ordering them to leave. The interaction became even more heated as the couple exchanged words with the group, but luckily no shots were fired and nobody was injured. Footage of the encounter quickly went viral and generated mixed reactions, with some supporting the McCloskeys as alarmed homeowners who were rightfully defending their property, while others accused the pair of needlessly harassing peaceful protesters. A few weeks later, the McCloskeys were each charged with one felony count of unlawful use of a weapon, which carries a maximum 4-year prison term and a fine of up to $10,000. Mark McCloskey pleaded guilty to misdemeanor assault, and Patricia pleaded guilty to harassment. Missouri Governor Mike Parson pardoned the couple in 2021. 3. Denise and Muhammad T. In 2016, a young woman named Jana Diallo told authorities that a couple had enslaved her for 16 years at their home in South Lake, Texas. She just escaped with help from neighbors and didn't even know her age. After arriving in Texas from the African nation of Guinea as a young girl in 2000, Diallo lived with Muhammad T and Denise Cross T, who both came from prominent families in Guinea and were members of the country's elite class. The couple would later claim that they brought Diallo into their home to give her a better life than she would have had in Guinea, where she lived in a thatched hut with no electricity. But the young woman's account of her childhood was nothing short of horrific. She said that T's kept her out of school and forced her to cook, clean, and care for their children with no pay. Diallo also recalled being beaten, sometimes with a belt or an electrical cord, being called a dog and other degrading names, and forced to sleep outside on a park bench as punishment. The T's denied the allegations, but were ultimately convicted of forced labor and several other charges. They were each sentenced to 7 years in federal prison and will be deported to Guinea after serving their time. 2. Martin and Jolene LaFrance. In 2018, sheriff's deputies in Cayuga County, New York received a tip that a couple living in Port Byron had faked their son's cancer to get donations and other perks, including an opportunity to meet the child's favorite football team. During a 4-month investigation, detectives discovered that the little boy never had Hodgkin's lymphoma as his parents claimed, and that they swindled over $3,000 from donors through a fraudulent online crowdfunding campaign. When the couple took their allegedly ailing son to meet the Syracuse Orange football team, a relative told Syracuse.com that the boy's condition unfortunately wasn't improving. He said that the youngster was in stage 3 of his lymphoma and had undergone surgery as well as radiation and chemotherapy. The family member also claimed that a new tumor had recently been discovered in the child's abdomen. It's unclear whether the relative was party to the scheme or a victim of it. Authorities charged Martin and Jolene each with 1 felony count of scheme to defraud. The case was still ongoing a few months later when the pair took fentanyl in the presence of their child. Emergency responders arrived to find Jolene unresponsive in the lawn and administered Narcan. After the incident, the couple faced additional charges for endangering the welfare of a child. They were each sentenced to 5 years of probation and ordered to repay the ill-gotten funds. 1. John and Janice Land. While serving a warrant in an unrelated case at a Rockville, Maryland home in 2014, Montgomery County police discovered that the basement door had an external deadbolt. They entered and found 2 young men on a comforter on the bare tile floor. There was no other furniture in the room and no working lights, and the basement's bathroom was padlocked from the outside. The homeowners, John and Janice Land, identified the men as their 22-year-old autistic twin sons. They allegedly admitted to locking the pair in the basement every night due to their tendency to wander off from the property, and because one of the men had damaged another part of the house. The brothers were typically locked in at around 10 o'clock every night and let out when their father woke up around 5 o'clock in the morning. Records show that the couple described their sons as being nonverbal and dependent on them for their everyday needs. In a statement to detectives, John Land said that he and Janice had recently removed furniture from the basement because it was soiled, and that they planned to buy new furniture as soon as they could afford it. John and Janice were charged with 2 counts of abuse of a vulnerable adult and 2 counts of false imprisonment, but prosecutors dropped the charges after determining that the twins' living conditions were unacceptable but not necessarily criminal. In deciding to dismiss the case, authorities also considered how the Lands were struggling to meet their son's needs after devoting their lives to caring for them. Instead of punishing them, social services stepped in and helped the couple find an appropriate home for the brothers, where they would get the care they needed and could still see their parents regularly.
Would you rather be caught on camera doing something outrageous naked, or go viral for taking your bad day out on an undeserving restaurant employee? Let us know in the comments down below. And if you enjoyed this video, be sure to leave a like and subscribe to the channel. Thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you in the next one. Bye.